Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Brief. Recently, because the American company Qualcomm was suspected of violating anti-monopoly laws, the State Administration for Market Regulation has launched an investigation into them. On October 12th, a person in charge from the Anti-Monopoly Bureau, of the State Administration for Market Regulation, further revealed the details and background of the case. The official said that in May 2023, Qualcomm announced its acquisition of the Israeli company Autotalks. After receiving a report, the State Administration for Market Regulation began looking into this matter. After conducting a comprehensive assessment, it was determined that although this concentration did not meet the reporting threshold, there was evidence proving that it has, or may have, the effect of eliminating or restricting competition. The official stated that on March 12, 2024, according to China's anti-monopoly law, the State Administration for Market Regulation issued a written notice requiring Qualcomm to file a report. Before Qualcomm files the report or obtains approval after filing, it is not allowed to proceed with the acquisition. Qualcomm, on March 14th, sent a letter to the State Administration for Market Regulation stating that it was abandoning this transaction. However, in June this year, Qualcomm completed the acquisition of Autotalks without filing a report or having any communication with the State Administration for Market Regulation. The official said that after receiving a report, the State Administration for Market Regulation conducted a verification, and Qualcomm also admitted to the relevant facts. Based on clear facts and conclusive evidence, the State Administration for Market Regulation has, in accordance with the law, opened an investigation into Qualcomm's acquisition of Autotalks for violating regulations on the concentration of business operators. Next, the State Administration for Market Regulation will continue to uphold the principles of legality, compliance, objectivity, and fairness to advance the related investigation work. According to China's anti-monopoly law, as long as a merger or acquisition has a substantial or potential impact on competition in the Chinese market, regardless of whether the transaction is domestic or abroad, it must comply with China's notification system. A concentration of business operators and acquisition, even if overseas, but with the effect of excluding or restricting competition in the Chinese domestic market, is subject to these regulations. To summarize, first, the biggest issue with Qualcomm being investigated is that a year ago they said they would abandon the acquisition, but a year later they suddenly changed their mind and completed it without notifying Chinese authorities. This is like anti-China politicians in the United States, saying one thing and doing another, which is malicious and shows a lack of respect for China's regulatory authorities. Given Qualcomm's previous disrespect for the Chinese side during the investigation, they shouldn't be surprised if they lose access to the Chinese market. Second, the State Administration for Market Regulation publicly announced the investigation and disclosed the case's background. This curbs Qualcomm's arrogance and warns Chinese companies to be cautious of risks when purchasing Qualcomm's chips. This is also a good opportunity to encourage domestic substitution. Third, amid the fierce China-US rivalry, American companies have become the ones caught in the middle. However, compared to Chinese companies like Huawei that have been put on the US blacklist, China has actually treated American companies quite politely and in accordance with the law. Unlike the US, which often can't even come up with a reason and simply bans companies under the pretext of national security, China's business environment is much more stable than that of the United States. In addition, over the past week, how many countermeasures has China rolled out? Countermeasures involving heavy rare earths, super hard materials, lithium batteries, and more have caught the Trump administration off guard, shocking some Western media and observers. Their analysis suggests that this move by China can be considered a brilliant display of power, using both carrot and stick. On one hand, it demonstrated China's ability to hold critical resources. On the other, it also signaled a willingness to engage in dialogue on supply chain issues. Source: American Political News Network. In a commentary published on October 11th, it was stated that on the 9th, China introduced its most wide-ranging rare earth export control measures to date. Unlike previous regulations, these new rules not only allow China to restrict the export of rare earth raw materials and magnets, but also cover any equipment containing rare earth elements. since products ranging from Apple phones to electric vehicle motors and even fighter jet sensors all rely on Chinese rare earths. These new regulations have far-reaching implications. These regulations grant China potential veto power over most sectors of global manufacturing. Eisenstadt, who served as Deputy Assistant to the President for International Economic Affairs during Trump's first term, said that China is now demonstrating its strength, showing the world that it has the ability to hold up key areas of global trade. Former Trump administration officials pointed out that this move by China is a masterful display of power, highlighting China's influence. The widening gap between China's strategic approach and the Trump administration's improvisational tactics is increasingly apparent. Tobin, former director for China at the U.S. National Security Council, described it. We, the United States, are playing regular chess, while China has already moved to advanced-level chess. The article states that Trump has viewed trade as the core metric for judging the success or failure of U.S.-China relations. An anonymous former Trump administration official said that, more often than not, the Trump administration was just dealing with immediate crises, lacking broader ideological guidance and strategic vision. In February this year, Trump signed an executive order requiring all departments to do their utmost to expand domestic mineral production capacity. However, even America's allies admit that it will still take several years for new mines to become operational. An anonymous professional in the U.S. rare earth industry frankly admitted that the United States is highly dependent on other countries for resource procurement, almost like an addiction. No one knows when this dependence can be broken or when real efforts will be made to solve this problem. This professional admitted, to be honest, this issue has existed for 20 years, and people simply haven't realized how dire our current situation is. Policy News Network has noted that while China is demonstrating its influence, it is also sending signals to ease tensions. The spokesperson for China's Ministry of Commerce stated on the 12th that China's export controls are not a ban on exports, but rather permits are granted for applications that meet the requirements. Before the measures were announced, China had already notified relevant countries and regions through bilateral export communication mechanisms. China is willing to strengthen dialogue and exchanges on export controls with all countries to better maintain cooperation. The security and stability of global industrial and supply chains have previously benefited from trade policy advice provided to the U.S. Trade Representative's Office and the Department of Commerce. Scholar Booth, who has consulted on trade policy, said that this time China is essentially using both the carrot and the stick. In other words, China wants us to ensure the stability and security of the supply chain in a long-term and systematic way rather than through piecemeal efforts. The article states that if this cooperative approach is not adopted, trade friction will only intensify further. Given the United States' continued reliance on China for industrial raw materials and consumer goods imports, this could have serious consequences for the U.S. economy. Johnson, a partner at the Shanghai consulting firm Tidal Wave Solution, said that China has not yet taken similar measures in the fields of pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, or chemicals. If China were to take action in these areas tomorrow, the U.S. economy could be paralyzed, and the U.S. would be completely unprepared for it. The new round of trade tensions between China and the U.S. has caught many in the West by surprise. After all, there have been reports that the leaders of China and the U.S. will meet soon. However, an article in the New York Times on October 11th pointed out that, from the Chinese perspective, the recent measures are merely a counterattack against U.S. suppression. The U.S. says one thing and does another, while claiming to act in good faith. In reality, it keeps ramping up technological restrictions on China. The article also argues that the new round of trade tensions shows there is a fundamental difference in how China and the U.S. define competition. From Trump's perspective, issues like trade and technology can be handled separately. In other words, the U.S. can keep escalating technological restrictions on China while still pushing for a major trade agreement between the two countries. But in China's eyes, both trade and technology issues are part of the U.S.'s comprehensive efforts to suppress China. Currently, the U.S. Politics in the US is in turmoil, and the government is currently in a state of shutdown. Although the US previously promised to gradually reduce its dependence on Chinese rare earths, achieving this goal still seems a long way off. Huang Ewei, a professor at the School of International Relations at Renmin University of China, said that of course China expected Trump to react strongly and has never underestimated him. However, in many areas, China still holds advantages. He said that China might hope to use this influence to push Trump to reach broader decisions on other issues in the relationship rather than being limited to the trade sector. At the same time, the article says this may also be China sending a message to the EU and other countries and regions, hoping they will not underestimate China's own strength. Huang Ewei said that this move demonstrates China's great confidence and strong capabilities, and that other countries need not be afraid or sacrifice China's interests just to please the United States. The Financial Times in the UK also took note of China's tough countermeasures. On the 11th, they published a commentary stating that China's large-scale export control measures this time have shocked the White House, while Trump's tariff threats have also excited some American hawks. Using the words of a US official, it was described as if Christmas had come early. Former CIA China expert Wald said that Trump's reaction was exactly what China had anticipated. It's an emotional response. Wald said that the Chinese side was definitely well aware that Trump would react this way. Trump felt humiliated and had to take action to respond to criticism from hardliners. In this high-stakes gamble, he has raised the stakes. Will Trump choose to fold, or will he continue to bet? Nick Akhtar, a partner at the law firm Wiley Rain and a former senior Commerce Department official during Trump's first term, believes that no matter what Trump chooses to do, China is not likely to back down either. Nick Akhtar said, "Some people think this is just a negotiation, but they are completely mistaken. This time, China will not compromise in the face of threats, and as they watch the US market decline, the Chinese side will believe that the US is, in fact, shooting itself in the foot." However, Huang Wen, dean of the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China, believes that this round of tensions will ultimately be resolved through negotiations. He said that China's countermeasures have their advantages. This will force the US back to the negotiating table. China is used to the US's saber-rattling tactics. According to foreign media analysis, there's an interesting point. Foreign media now interview Chinese scholars more frequently for their interpretations of the China-US rivalry. This is a successful example of spreading China's voice. Notably, Chinese scholars emphasize a key point. These countermeasures demonstrate China's strong confidence and considerable strength. It also serves as a warning to other countries not to sacrifice China's interests just to please the United States. In other words, China's strong response this time is not only aimed at the US, but also serves as a warning to other economies not to undermine China's interests. This includes the European Union, Mexico, Japan, and even Southeast Asian countries. Any economy that is considering making a gesture of goodwill to Trump must also consider the consequences of China's countermeasures.